Admiral Torth stood on the bridge of the Zyran Ascendancy, arms crossed, staring at the holographic projection of the derelict ship floating near Xiphos 9. The vessel was unmistakably human, bulky, industrial, and old. Too old. The hull was pitted with asteroid impacts, the insignia of the long-defunct Terran Stellar Union barely visible beneath the layers of scorched metal. "This ship predates the Concorde," murmured First Officer Vechlin, his scaled fingers tapping nervously against the console. "It should be dust." Torth narrowed his eyes. "And yet it's not." That wasn't the strangest part. The ship wasn't just intact, it was active. Weak power signatures pulsed from its core, feeding into an array of long-dormant systems. More alarming was its position. It hung too close to the dying star. Xiphos 9 was in its final stages, days, perhaps hours, from collapse. Torth turned to his comms officer. "Open a channel." The bridge filled with static. No response. The ship wasn't transmitting distress signals, nor was it acknowledging their presence. Just a silent, ancient wreck. Vechlin's voice dropped to a cautious whisper. "Admiral, this isn't normal. Humans don't just leave ships like this behind." Torth exhaled slowly. "Send a boarding team." Lieutenant Koresh stepped onto the docking bridge, his squad moving in tight formation. The airlock to the Soul Destiny, as the faded nameplate suggested, was warped but functional. With the hiss of escaping gas, the doors groaned open, revealing darkness. The ship's interior was coated in a thin layer of frost, and the only sounds were the team's own breathing and the distant creaks of metal under stress. "Life signs?" Koresh asked. The medic checked his scanner. 1. Deep inside. They moved cautiously through the corridors, weapons raised. The design was archaic: manual control panels, exposed wiring, gravity plating that flickered with each step. The ship should have been dead, but something had kept it alive. The control room was a mess of shattered glass and blinking, flickering monitors. A single chair sat in the center, surrounded by cracked screens displaying unreadable data streams. And in that chair, covered in frost, was a man. Koresh stepped forward. The human was alive barely, his breathing shallow, his skin tinged with the pallor of prolonged stasis. His uniform was unfamiliar, his hair unkempt, but his body was surprisingly intact for someone who had clearly been asleep for centuries. "Wake him," Koresh ordered. The medic administered a stimulant, and within moments, the human's body convulsed. His eyes fluttered open, sharp, blue, and filled with immediate terror. "No, no!" His voice cracked as he jerked upright, flailing against unseen restraints. His gaze darted wildly, taking in the alien faces around him. "You need to leave. Now." Koresh stepped back, unsettled. "Easy. We're not here to harm you." The human's chest rose and fell in ragged breaths. He swallowed hard, trying to process what was happening. "Where am I? How long?" His eyes snapped to the screens. "The star. Tell me it's still stable." Koresh hesitated. "It's nearing collapse." The human's expression darkened instantly. He swung his legs off the chair, staggering as he tried to stand. "Damn it! Damn it! It's too soon." Koresh grabbed his arm. "What are you talking about?" The human met his gaze, and for the first time, Koresh saw something deeper in those eyes, not just fear, but understanding. "You don't get it," the human said. "This ship, it's not what you think. It's not just a relic." His fingers gripped the console as he tried to steady himself. "This ship is why the star is dying." Koresh's stomach tightened. "Explain." The human exhaled shakily. "You wouldn't believe me. Try me." The human's gaze flicked to the viewport, where the distant, glowing orb of Xiphos 9 pulsed erratically. He swallowed hard. "This ship was built to harvest supernovae." Silence. Koresh exchanged glances with his squad, then tapped his calm. "Admiral, you're going to want to hear this." Torth listened as the human, Captain Elias Voss, was brought aboard the Zyran Ascendancy and debriefed. He was exhausted, his movements sluggish, but his mind was sharp. Too sharp. Your people abandoned this ship long ago, Torth stated, watching him carefully. Why? Voss's jaw clenched. Because it was a mistake. The Admiral leaned forward. Explain. Voss ran a hand through his tangled hair, exhaling. The Soul Destiny was part of an experimental fleet. Ships designed to tap into dying stars, extract their energy, and control their collapse. He let the weight of the words settle before continuing. It worked. Too well. One mistake, one miscalculation, and the entire process goes out of control. Torth's gaze flicked to the display of Xiphos 9, now pulsing erratically, its outer layers shedding in waves. You're saying this ship caused the instability? Voss nodded grimly. When I went into stasis, it was supposed to be temporary. But the system failed. The ship kept drawing energy, feeding off the star for centuries. He glanced at the Admiral. And now you've woken it up. The bridge fell silent. Veclin broke the tension. How long before it collapses? Voss didn't hesitate. Minutes. Maybe less. A warning klaxon blared across the bridge. Torth snapped his head to the sensors. The star's readings had spiked. Something was happening. Admiral! A technician shouted. Massive energy surge! The star is entering terminal collapse. Voss's fists clenched. You don't understand. This isn't just a natural supernova anymore. Torth turned to him, voice like steel. Then what is it? Voss exhaled. When he spoke, his voice was low. It's a weapon. The bridge fell into dead silence. The Soul Destiny, the derelict relic they had all dismissed as a curiosity, was something far worse. Torth's grip tightened on the console. They had to move. Now. The Zyran Ascendancy trembled as waves of energy rolled off Xiphos 9. Admiral Torth gripped the armrest of his command chair, eyes locked on the rapidly deteriorating star. It pulsed erratically, its outer layers peeling away in unnatural spirals. The scans showed impossible readings, massive power fluctuations that shouldn't exist in a natural stellar collapse. Voss stood beside him, still unsteady but alert. You need to get your fleet out of here. Now. Torth didn't move. Explain how we stop this first. Voss turned to the console, pulling up a data feed from the Soul Destiny. Ancient systems flickered to life, spitting out fragmented readouts and long-dead human code. His fingers worked fast, bypassing corrupted logs, forcing the failing computer to cough up something useful. The screen stabilized, revealing an unsettling truth. This ship has been drawing power from the star for centuries, Voss said, voice tight. It wasn't supposed to last this long. The process should have shut down when we abandoned the project. He exhaled sharply. But something went wrong. The siphon didn't stop, it just slowed down. The ship has been starving this sun for 200 years. Torth frowned. You said this vessel was built to harvest stars. Why? Voss hesitated. He had to choose his words carefully. Because we thought we could control them. The bridge fell silent. Veclin, standing at the tactical station, folded his arms. You're saying humans designed ships to manipulate stellar collapses? Voss's lips pressed into a thin line. More than that. We designed them to ignite or prevent supernovae at will. He tapped the screen, displaying an old project name buried in the data logs, Stellar Reigns. This was the last great ambition of the Terran Stellar Union. A fleet of ships capable of wielding the power of dying stars. Torth's stomach twisted. Why build something so reckless? Voss's eyes darkened. Because war was coming. Torth studied him. With who? Voss let out a humorless chuckle. You. A heavy silence fell over the bridge. Torth's voice remained steady. The war never happened. Voss nodded. Because we disappeared first. He leaned over the console, scrolling through old mission logs. The Terran Union had a simple philosophy: control the most powerful forces in the galaxy, and no one could challenge us. The supernova fleet was the ultimate deterrent. Veclin's claws tapped against the console. A deterrent that could have ended every species in the Concord. Voss looked up. That was the idea. Torth exhaled slowly. Human ambition. Dangerous, relentless. He had always considered their kind a minor threat, clever, aggressive, but manageable. Now he wasn't so sure. Voss continued. The plan was to build 50 ships, each capable of triggering or preventing a supernova. He shook his head. But it didn't go as planned. The technology was unstable. We lost ships, entire crews, before we understood the risks. And then, his jaw tightened. The Union collapsed before we finished. Some of the fleet was destroyed. Others were lost. This is the last one. Torth's gaze flicked back to the viewport. Xiphos 9 had begun to twist in on itself, a slow, violent implosion. The star's death should have taken millennia. Now it had minutes. This ship caused this? Torth asked. Voss nodded. The siphon altered the balance of the collapse. Instead of a gradual death, it's falling inward all at once. When it goes, it's going to be big. Veklen's expression was grim. How big? Voss's eyes locked onto his. System-wide extinction big. A cold silence swept the bridge. Torth stood. Then tell me how to stop it. Voss hesitated. There's one way. But you're not going to like it. Torth gestured for him to continue. Voss turned back to the console. The Soul Destiny has a failsafe. If the siphon destabilizes, the ship can use all its stored energy to create a controlled detonation pulse. A burst strong enough to force the star's collapse into a stable singularity. It won't explode. It'll become a black hole instead. Veklen's eyes widened. You want to turn a dying star into a black hole? Voss exhaled. It's either that or let it explode and take out everything within 10 light years. Torth's expression was unreadable. What do you need? Voss grimaced. Power. More than the Soul Destiny has left. The failsafe was designed for a fleet of these ships, not one. If we try it now, the system might fail. Veklen swore under his breath. And if it does? Voss didn't answer. He didn't have to. Torth turned to his officers. Reroute auxiliary power from every ship in the fleet. Veklen's eyes widened. That'll weaken our shields. Torth's tone brooked no argument. Then we better pray this works. The next 10 minutes were chaos. Across the fleet, energy reserves drained as power surged toward the Soul Destiny. The ancient ship groaned under the sudden influx, systems flickering to life in protest. On the bridge, Voss worked faster than he ever had in his life, bypassing decayed protocols, forcing the old machine to remember what it was built to do. Torth stood behind him, watching. He had placed the fate of his fleet, of millions, in human hands. Almost there, Voss muttered. The reactor core vibrated beneath them, thrumming with more power than it had held in 2 centuries. Outside, Xiphos 9 trembled. The outer layers peeled away, forming a spiraling disk of fire and radiation. Any second now, it would either collapse or explode. Voss's fingers hovered over the final command. He turned to Torth. No guarantees. Torth gave a single nod. Do it. Voss slammed his palm against the activation panel. The ship screamed as stored energy erupted outward. A brilliant shockwave burst from the Soul Destiny, racing toward the dying star. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, space folded inward. The core of Xiphos 9 imploded, the light vanishing in an instant. The explosion that should have torn the system apart never came. Instead, where the star had once burned, there was only darkness, a perfect, swirling singularity. The fleet drifted in stunned silence. The system had survived. Voss exhaled, body slumping against the console. It worked. Torth didn't take his eyes off the viewport. It worked. But as he stared into the abyss where a star had once been, a new thought took root in his mind. Humans had built ships that played with the very fabric of creation. And now he knew, without question, that if humanity ever returned in force, they would not come as conquerors. They would come as gods. Silence filled the bridge of the Zyran Ascendancy. The swirling black void where Xiphos 9 had once burned was a haunting reminder of what had just occurred. An entire star collapsed in an instant, not by nature, but by human hands. Admiral Torth exhaled, staring at the readouts. Every sensor screamed at the impossibility of what they had just witnessed. A carefully controlled detonation, an artificial singularity, a weaponized supernova turned into a black hole. He turned to Voss, who sat slumped at the ancient console of the Soul Destiny. The human looked exhausted, sweat beading along his temple despite the cold air. His hands still hovered over the controls, as if expecting the ship to protest the feat it had just performed. Veclin broke the silence. That was not normal. Voss let out a dry chuckle, rubbing a hand down his face. No. It wasn't. He turned, meeting Tortha's unreadable gaze. And now you understand why we buried these ships. Torth studied him. Voss wasn't gloating. There was no pride in his voice, no satisfaction in what had just happened. If anything, there was regret. You had the power to destroy stars at will, Torth said carefully. And you abandoned it? Voss shook his head. Not abandoned. Erased. The Stellar Union was dying, stretched too thin, too arrogant. The war we were preparing for never came, but by the time we realized it, these ships had become more dangerous than any enemy we might have faced. His fingers tapped against the console absently. So we made a choice. Veclin frowned. To give up the most powerful weapons in the galaxy? Voss's eyes darkened. To make sure no one could use them. Torth leaned forward. And yet here we are. You failed. Voss exhaled. I slept through the failure. Torth's expression didn't change, but he was studying the human carefully now. Something in Voss's tone was off. You personally made sure these ships were erased? Voss hesitated. I was part of the project. One of the last captains. I knew what these things could do, what they were meant for. He looked out at the black hole, his voice quieter now. When the order came to decommission the fleet, most were dismantled, scrapped. But a few, like the Soul Destiny, vanished before we could shut them down. Veclin's posture stiffened. How many? Voss sighed. Originally? 50. Destroyed? Maybe 42. Tortha's fingers curled against the armrest of his chair. You're telling me 8 of these ships are still out there? Voss didn't answer right away. That hesitation spoke louder than words. Tortha's voice dropped to a near growl. Elias Voss. How many of these things are still operational? The human finally met his gaze. And in that moment, Torth saw the truth. 3. The bridge went cold. 3 more ships still out there. 3 more vessels capable of ripping stars apart, extinguishing entire systems, turning suns into weapons. Torth took a slow breath. And you think no one else has found them? Voss's jaw tightened. I hope no one had. Veclin swore under his breath. Hope isn't good enough. Voss's exhaustion was giving way to something else, a quiet, controlled urgency. I can track them, he said. If you let me access the full database, I might be able to pull the last known coordinates of the missing ships. Torth folded his arms. And then what? We find them before someone else does. Veclin scoffed. You expect us to believe that humanity really tried to bury these ships? He gestured to the black hole outside. You built this, and then just walked away? Voss's expression turned hard. You think this was easy? His voice had an edge now. You think no one argued? That no one tried to use them for their own gain? He let out a short, bitter laugh. Half the Union's high command wanted to keep them. I was part of the group that fought against it. He looked Torth dead in the eyes. And do you know what happened to us? Torth remained silent. Voss exhaled. They tried to kill us. The weight of those words settled over the bridge. The last days of the Stellar Union weren't clean. It wasn't some grand, noble farewell. It was a damn civil war between those who wanted these ships erased and those who wanted to keep them. His fingers curled against the console. The ones who wanted to keep them lost. But not before they managed to hide a few. Torth sat back, absorbing this new piece of history. If what Voss said was true, then somewhere out in the void, these weapons were still waiting. Veclin frowned. What if someone's already found them? Voss's expression darkened. Then we're all screwed. Torth stood abruptly. We need to locate those ships. Now. Voss exhaled. Then I need access to everything you've got on deep space anomalies. Gravity wells, uncharted systems, anything unusual. Veclin glanced at the Admiral, uneasy. We're trusting him? Torth studied Voss for a long moment before nodding. For now. Voss turned back to the terminal, fingers flying across the controls, bringing up old star charts, digging through centuries of lost data. Every few minutes he murmured something under his breath, half calculations, half curses. Then, his hand froze over the display. Torth stepped forward. What? Voss's face was pale. He didn't speak at first, just slowly turned the screen toward them. The data showed an unknown structure drifting at the edge of a dying system. Faint energy readings, weak but consistent. A power signature almost identical to the Soul Destiny. Torth's gut twisted. One of the lost ships. Voss swallowed. It's still active. Veclin tensed. Then we're too late. Voss's voice was barely above a whisper. No. If someone found it, they'd be using it. His fingers tightened on the console. This thing is still waiting. Torth straightened, his decision already made. Then we move now. Voss nodded. But in his eyes, Torth saw something else. Not just urgency. Not just fear. A deep, lingering guilt. And Torth realized something then. Elias Voss wasn't just trying to erase these ships from history. He was trying to atone for them. The fleet cut through the void, engines humming with urgency. The coordinates Voss had uncovered led to a dying system on the edge of known space, a place no one should have had reason to visit. Torth sat in his command chair, watching the tactical display. The atmosphere on the bridge was tight with tension. No one spoke. The only sound was the quiet hum of the ship's systems and the rhythmic beeping of the scanners. Veclin stood near the sensor station, claws tapping against his console. We're approaching the anomaly, he said. It's there. Voss leaned over the display. The readings were faint, but unmistakable. A structure, drifting near a white dwarf, barely holding on to power. Another supernova ship. His stomach clenched. Torth turned to him. What should we expect? Voss exhaled. Depends. If the ship is still dormant, it should be like the Soul Destiny, half dead, systems failing, a ghost of its former self. He hesitated. But if someone's already activated it? Torth nodded. Then it's a weapon. Veclin's screen flickered. His eyes narrowed. Something's wrong. Torth turned. What? Veclin tapped his console, bringing up the long-range feed. We're detecting a residual energy signature. Voss leaned closer, eyes scanning the data. His chest tightened. That's a launch trail. Torth's voice was sharp. You mean someone's already been here? Voss nodded grimly. Not just been here. Left here. Recently. Silence fell over the bridge. Torth's claws tapped against his armrest, his mind racing. Can you tell where they went? Voss's fingers flew across the console. The old ship's database groaned under the weight of his request, but after a few tense seconds, it spat out fragmented data. A set of partial coordinates. Voss paled. Torth caught the expression. What? Voss turned slowly. That trajectory leads to Zyron-controlled space. The bridge erupted into movement. Veclin cursed under his breath. Torth shot up from his seat. Are you sure? Voss gestured to the data. It's incomplete, but the direction is clear. Whatever ship was here, it's heading straight for a populated sector. His voice turned grave. And if they know what they have, they won't be testing it in an empty system. Torth didn't waste a second. He turned to Veclin. Full burn. Get us there before they do. The fleet tore through subspace, pushing engines past safe limits. Every second mattered. Torth stood at the helm, watching the navigation readouts. If Voss was right, they had hours, maybe less. Voss paced near the command station, hands clenched. "You need to prepare for the worst," he said. Torth's eyes flicked to him. "Meaning?" Voss stopped, exhaling slowly. "If someone has activated that ship, they might not understand what they have." He looked at the Admiral. "Or worse, they do." Torth's jaw tightened. "What are we dealing with?" Voss turned to the main display. Every supernova ship had different capabilities. The Soul Destiny was built to control collapses. But others? His throat tightened. Some were designed to do the opposite. Veclin stiffened. "You mean?" "Yes." Voss's voice was grim. "Some were built to force supernovae. To turn stable stars into bombs." Torth's spines bristled. "Then we can't afford to fail." By the time they reached the target system, alarms were already screaming. The star at its center, a peaceful yellow sun, was pulsing unnaturally. Massive solar flares arced outward, twisting in chaotic patterns. The space around it rippled with raw energy, the unmistakable signature of forced collapse. On the edge of the system, a massive, angular vessel loomed in the darkness. Another supernova ship, fully activated. And someone was inside. Torth's voice was steel. "Hail them." The comms officer worked quickly, sending out a transmission. For a moment, there was no response. Then, a voice crackling through the static. Well, you found us." Voss's breath hitched. That voice. He knew that voice. Torth narrowed his eyes. "Identify yourself." The reply came with a chuckle. "I suppose I owe you that much. Commander Ralvek, former Zyran intelligence." Voss felt something cold settle in his chest. Ralvek. He had been one of the most feared Zyran operatives decades ago, before vanishing. Torth's tone didn't waver. "Ralvek, whatever you think you're doing, you don't understand the consequences." "Oh, I understand perfectly." The view screen flickered. Ralvek appeared, older, scarred, but his eyes burned with conviction. "This is power," he said, gesturing behind him. "Power that was stolen from the universe. Power that belongs to those strong enough to wield it." Torth's voice was cold. "And what do you plan to do with it?" Ralvek leaned forward. "The same thing your ancestors feared." He smiled. "Make sure the galaxy remembers who's in charge." Voss's stomach twisted. "You're going to detonate the star." Ralvek spread his hands. "Why not? Imagine it. One system, one demonstration, and every empire, every species, will fall in line." Torth's claws dug into his armrest. "You're going to kill billions." Ralvek shrugged. "Sacrifices must be made." Voss's hands curled into fists. "You don't understand what you're playing with. That ship wasn't built for control, it was built for annihilation. If you trigger that supernova, it won't just take this system." He pointed at the unstable star. "It'll destabilize everything within 30 light years. Your own people will die. Your colonies, your fleets, all of it." For the first time, hesitation flickered across Ralvek's face. Torth pressed the advantage. "You think you can control it. But the humans who built these ships, they couldn't. That's why they buried them." His voice hardened. "You are not stronger than the ones who made this." Ralvek's eyes darted to his console. The ship's alarms were screaming. The star was reaching critical mass. Voss stepped forward. "Shut it down. Now. Before it's too late." Ralvek's jaw clenched. "I..." The screen flickered, then cut to static. Torth snapped around. "Status?" Veclin's claws flew over the controls. "The ship's reactor is overloading. He's lost control." The view screen flashed. The supernova ship began to shudder, energy crackling across its hull. It was tearing itself apart. Voss's blood ran cold. "If it goes..." Torth didn't wait. "Weapons, target its core! Now!" The fleet opened fire. Blasts of energy slammed into the failing vessel, piercing deep. Then, a detonation. Not the star, the ship itself. It ripped apart, sending a shockwave through the system. The energy destabilizing the star vanished. The collapse stopped. Silence. The fleet drifted. The system held. Voss exhaled, hands shaking. They had stopped it. Torth turned to him. Is it over? Voss stared at the wreckage. His voice was quiet. For now.